This week on Excelsior Journeys, I sit down with lawyer and activist Jeffrey Deskovic. At 16, he was arrested for the rape and murder of one of his classmates at Peekskill High School. At 17, he was convicted. And for 16 years in a men's maximum security prison, he fought to overturn his conviction. He's here with us to tell his story, which may be a little too intense for younger listeners. So listener discretion is advised. JLD, do the honors.
Hey, this is John Lee Dumas of the award-winning podcast Entrepreneurs on Fire, and you're listening to the Excelsior Journeys with George Sirois. Prepare to ignite.
Is there a burning desire within to share your creativity with the rest of the world? Do you insist on pursuing your passion by any means necessary? Then you are on an Excelsior journey, and you are not alone. Welcome back to Excelsior Journeys. My name is George Sirois. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to over 80 interviews I've had with so many great people. I'm really looking forward to always hearing your feedback. If you can, please go ahead and hit subscribe on any of the platforms you can find on he'sgotit.com/podcasts. If you're an iPhone user, strongly recommend the Apple Podcast app. Very user-friendly. And I really would appreciate all the support you guys are giving me. You guys are incredible. Now, Bill Shakespeare once wrote, "Some are born into greatness, some pursue greatness, and others have greatness thrust upon them." Considering the story that my guest has this week, greatness is not exactly the word for everything that he had to endure, but at the same time, what he's chosen to do with what happened to him really makes him a great man. My guest this week is Jeffrey Deskovic. Jeffrey was a Peekskill High School student at 16 when he was arrested of the rape and murder of a classmate. And at 17, he was convicted. After 16 years in prison and many attempts through himself and his lawyers to petition to get a rerun of the DNA on the scene, that was able to finally happen 16 years later. And turns out that DNA matched a convicted killer. And so that freed Jeffrey. And instead of just going about his business, he went in a much bigger direction. And that is something that we all really need to celebrate. He not only got his bachelor's degree in behavioral science, but he also got a master's degree in criminal justice, and then went on to found the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which really has an amazing mission. I'm really looking forward to speaking with him to get all the details of everything that he has chosen to do and all the greatness that he has already done. And it is my privilege to introduce for this week's guest, Jeffrey Deskovic. Jeffrey, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you so much for being here. So before we go into your story, please tell us in your own words about the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice.
We have as our mission freeing people who are wrongfully imprisoned, who are in the position that I was once in. And we also have a policy initiative as well. We work on policy changes aimed at preventing what happened to me from happening to other people. So really briefly, since founding the organization in 2011, we've been able to free 10 wrongfully convicted people. And we've also were able to pass 3 laws in New York: videotaping interrogations, identification reform, DNA database expansion. Then, as part of a coalition group called It Could Happen to You, which the foundation's part of and which I'm an advisory board member of, we were able to pass 4 additional laws. So oversight for prosecutors, discovery reform, and that's in New York. And in Pennsylvania, we were able to pass a law that would provide automatic expungement of criminal record for anybody that had been exonerated. So we had the anomaly that you might be exonerated in court, but you still had a criminal record for that charge you were exonerated of when you went on a job interview. So we're currently pursuing further policy changes in New York. So we're seeking to get rid of exceptions that allow exceptions to the general law that allow mandate videotape of interrogations. We're working on a couple of parole reform bills. That's in New York. In Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is one of 15 states that does not currently offer exoneree compensation. So we're working on passing that there. And again, the oversight for the prosecutors. While in California, we're again looking to have the oversight for prosecutors. And we see an opportunity to kill the death penalty, which we think is important because in light of the risk of executing an innocent person.
Wow. Wow, that is amazing. And where can my listeners find the website that gives more detail about this?
Yes, www.deskovic.org. That's DESKOVIC.org. I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook. I have a public figure page there and LinkedIn as well. And we also have a crowdfunding campaign on the website Patreon. So, if people want to get involved in freeing people who are wrongfully convicted, my vision, my dream is, what if there were 25,000 people that could afford $3 to $5 a month on a recurring basis in order to free wrongfully convicted people? That would give us close to $1 million budget and would allow us to hire further infrastructure, attorneys, paralegals, investigators, other essential personnel. So we could work on more than just the 10 cases that are active now. So we're working on 10 after we've gotten a different 10 out, but we would be able to work on more cases that way. And we would be able to open policy campaigns in other states, not just New York, Pennsylvania, and California, which we're currently doing.
Fabulous. And you can definitely consider me one of those patrons on that site. I will be definitely putting my money down, for that. I think it's a terrific cause. And I think that it is something that too many people really kind of overlook. They just look at someone, and just because they're in a courtroom, so many people just immediately go right to, okay, what did he do and how long is he going to be put away? So it's really amazing what you're doing here.
Thank you. Yeah, and to build off of your points, really, it's not an even playing field when you're in the courtroom because, the public and ultimately the jurors, they do have a similar line of reasoning what you meant, what you mentioned, and they think, well, obviously,
yeah,
if you didn't do it, they wouldn't have arrested you for it.
Right.
But actually, that, as we'll talk about in the interview, there's quite a few people that are in fact wrongfully imprisoned. Unfortunately, my case is not rare. Per the National Registry of Exonerations, which is a clearinghouse of information cataloging exonerations that have happened across the country, just from 1989 forward, there have been 2,755 exonerations to date.
Wow. It's pretty amazing. So normally on the show, what I talk about is the lightning bolt moment, which is what inspires people to kind of go in a specific direction. This was not the case for you, for your story. This was something where other circumstances really kind of came down on you. So let's start at the beginning. You're 16. You're in Peekskill High School. By the way, I grew up in Poughkeepsie, so I know Peekskill, right? And all of a sudden this happened. So tell us about what exactly happened here.
Sure. So I was a sophomore in Peekskill High School, and I had a classmate who was in two of my classes as a freshman. One as a sophomore. I barely knew her. She knew her name. She knew my name. I knew hers. That was really the extent of it. I think in 2 years we might have had one or two super short conversations. And, she went missing and her body was found a few days later. At that point, there had not been very many murders in Peekskill. So this basically shut the whole city down. Mm-hmm. Parents were bringing their kids to school and picking them up after school, bringing them right home. There were periodic town hall meetings, updates on the investigation, safety tips, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So in the course of the police investigation, they interviewed a lot of students from the school, and some of them told the police that they might want to speak to me because I was quiet. I was to myself. I didn't really fit in high school. So, I lived kind of a double life looking back on it. There was my life in school where I was on the fringes of the society because the kids were a little bit older than me, and I really wasn't into parties, drinking, chasing girls, organized sports. But after school, in the apartment complex I grew up at, which ironically was right across the street from the high school, I was kind of the life of the party. So whatever I would suggest would be what we would do, whether that was we were going to play kickball, basketball, ride bikes, play Monopoly, video games. We made up different games. So I had this dynamic dual life going in. But the police interviewed students from the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess their thinking was people that don't fit in, who are like to themselves, commit heinous crimes. They're likely suspects for it. I guess that was their thinking, why they would suggest to the police to speak with me. A follow-up thing, another factor was that this was really my first brush with death, and I had an emotional reaction to it as a sensitive teenager.
Yeah.
And the police interpreted my sensitivity and my being emotional, crying, as a sign that I was sorry for what I had did.
Yeah.
But then again, that really wasn't all that different from the rest of the people in Peekskill, because it was to the point that there was free mental health services set up throughout the town of Peekskill to help anyone that wanted it to process what had happened. Lastly, a reinforcing factor was that the Peekskill police got a psychological profile from the NYPD, which purported to have the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator, and I had the misfortune of matching that. So for about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me, in which half the time when they would talk to me as a suspect. And then when they would push too hard and I would become frightened and I'd want to get out of there, then Jeff, as this junior detective helper theme was pushed. Look, the kids won't talk freely around us. They will around you. Let us know if you hear anything. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions, congratulate me that my opinions were correct. Prior to being a high school student, prior to being a teenager, I should say, I wanted to be a cop when I grew up. So this unexpected early opportunity to do this quasi-police work was how they were able to pull the wool over my eyes. They did the good cop, bad cop routine, and I began to look up to the good cop as a father figure, which my actual father was never involved in my life in any aspect. I never met him, at least not until much later in life.
Right.
So that was another dynamic. And so through that ruse, they eventually got me to agree to take a polygraph test. So the next day, instead of going to the high school, I went to the police station where I thought that this test was going to happen. And instead, they drove me from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, as you know, to Brewster in Putnam County. So it was about 40 minutes away by car. So that meant I couldn't leave anymore. I was totally dependent upon the police. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so they didn't call around looking for me. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat. They gave me a 4-page brochure on how the polygraph worked, but it had a lot of big words in it, which I didn't understand. But then I figured, well, I'm there to help the police, so what does it matter? Let's just get on with it. Then they put me in a small room and gave me the polygraphist, who was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator. He was dressed like a civilian. He never identified himself as a cop. Never read me my rights. He gave me countless cups of coffee, which seems pretty clear he did that to get me nervous. And then he wired me up to the machine. And from there, he launched into his third-degree tactics. So he invaded my personal space. He raised his voice at me. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And my fear was increasing in proportion to the time. And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours. Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told me through the polygraph test result that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And so when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And at that point, the cop who was pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers were going to harm me, but that he'd been holding them off, but couldn't do so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he added that, "Look, just tell them what they want to hear. And you can go stop what they're doing. You can go home. You're not going to be arrested." So being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, I was just concerned my safety in the moment. I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and that no one else knew where I was either loomed very large in my mind.
Yeah.
I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. And then there's that push-pull dynamic, the possibility of harm, this false life preserver he's thrown me. And so I made up a story based on the information that he had given me that day and in the 6 weeks run up to the day of the polygraph. And by the time it was all said and done, I had collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably. Obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
Wow. Oh man, I can't imagine having gone through that. Like that is that words can't describe that sort of just tunnel vision that they seem to have. Just like they were so fixed upon you that they never thought to continue their police work to maybe find the one that was responsible. I can't believe that they would do that. I mean, actually, no, like knowing how things have progressed over the years, I can't help but believe it. you know.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us about what the whole court was, what the whole trial was like. What was happening like after you get arrested at 16, and then the trial happens. Was the trial just really quick, or was it something that they just kind of let it linger for a little while for you to just kind of sit in jail?
Well, I got bailed out after 35 days, but I felt like my life had basically come to an end. I mean, every time I made a court appearance, it was a major media moment from a guilt presumptive oriented perspective. I couldn't go back to the high school while my case was open. I was a hated figure in Peekskill. And parents, the few kids that would have played with me, their parents wouldn't allow them to because they thought I was a murderer and rapist, right? So I felt like really my life was over. So, I made a suicide attempt, and which resulted in my being involuntarily hospitalized for 6 months.
Wow.
But so it took from the time of arrest up until the time of trial, it was approximately 10 to 11 months. I just wanted to mention that I wasn't in jail at that time, but I was incarcerated just in a different form. So in terms of the trial and just getting a little bit into putting some color to that. So a DNA test result came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen the victim didn't match me. But rather than acknowledge they made a mistake, they continued to prosecute full speed ahead. So to counter that DNA, the following took place. So the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud and commit perjury. So he claimed, this is 6 months after doing the autopsy, hundreds of autopsies later, he claimed that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence, which he said showed that the victim was sleeping around, which is what allowed the prosecutor to argue that it didn't matter, that the DNA didn't come from me. That didn't mean I was innocent, that there could have been yet another person that she slept with prior to my murdering and raping her. Taking it a step further, they mentioned another youth by name that they claimed had slept with the victim, but he never set the proper evidentiary foundation. So he never called him as a witness, never asked him to give a DNA sample. At the same time, another thing happened is that the police, when the DNA didn't match me, the police went back out into the field and they interviewed 17 witnesses who knew the victim in one capacity or another. And all of them told the police that she didn't have a boyfriend, that there was no consensual sex, but the cops did not document those witness interviews. And as a result of that, the defense never learned of that. The victim's family was not coming to court, so they had no idea of what was falsely being said about their daughter in court in order to try to wrongfully convict me. At the same time, the public defender that I had essentially didn't defend me. He never interviewed or called as a witness my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball when the crime happened. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used that to argue that it proved the confession was coerced and false. He literally never cross-examined the medical examiner. He allowed his fraud and perjury to go unchallenged. He rarely met with me. Whenever I tried to explain to him that I was innocent and what happened in the interrogation room, he was always shutting me up. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent. And he wouldn't allow me to testify either. When I was interrogated, it was not videotaped or audio taped. There was no signed confession. It was just the cop's word for it. And so they left the threat and false promise out of their story when they came into court. So I wanted to testify and put those facts on the record, but he wouldn't allow me to testify. Another thing at the trial is that the victim's clothes were entered into evidence, including her bra, which was important because the jury asked to see the bra. And one of my statements was that I said that I ripped her bra off, but there's some bras you can't rip off the body. So when the jury asked to see that, that was kind of a bright spot. And it was at that point that the judge told us that the evidence had been left in the courtroom over the weekend and that apparently the custodians thought it was garbage. And so they threw it out. And so it wasn't available anymore. And so when you added it all up, I was wrongfully convicted. And I was given a 15 to life sentence. I had been charged as an adult. I'd been sentenced as an adult, and I was sent to a men's maximum security prison. He sentenced me despite telling me on the record, maybe you are innocent.
Oh, man. And not only did they proceed to just completely destroy you and your reputation, but then they saw fit to do the same thing to the victim. Like that's insane. That they would go to that level to basically just kind of denigrate the victim in order to claim their case against you. That's, I have no words for that. Wow.
I want to add that their actions ultimately cost another person their life, because the actual perpetrator left free while I was doing time for his crime. He went on to kill a second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and, mother of two.
That's insane. It's insane that happened. So you get convicted and you're sent over to a maximum security prison. What was that whole situation like for you?
Yeah, it was very frightening. I mean, it was a men's maximum security prison. I was 17, and these were fully formed adults. Many of whom were guilty of serious violent crimes. I had a bullseye on my back because there's a vigilante mentality towards people who've been convicted of sex offenses. So there were stabbings and cuttings and other, gang activity and other violence on a daily basis. A lot of the guards were verbally abusive as well. At times throughout the years, at times I got beat up. One time I nearly lost my life. I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. So it was all of those things in prison.
And yet you were still able to hold on to at least some bit of hope that something could happen. Were you starting the petitioning right away? Did you, obviously you got different lawyers, correct?
Yeah, I got a different lawyer. So I was assigned a different type of public defender, not from the same office. I'll say that I think I got really good representation during the appeals. It's just that the closed-mindedness of the courts is what did me in. Okay. So just putting a little color to that, I did file, I did file and lose 7 appeals. That included several attempts at getting further DNA testing because the DNA data bank had been created. One time I lost in court because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information on the filing procedure, and that resulted in my petition arriving 4 days too late. So I lost procedurally on that basis, and the next 3 courts upheld that ruling. And so then that meant my appeals were over. That was 11 years in, and so the only way back into court when your appeals are over is if there's a retroactive change in the law, or if you can find some new evidence that wasn't known before that probably would have resulted in a different outcome. Mm-hmm. So I wrote letters for 4 years, rarely getting responses, just trying to find an attorney and an investigator to help me, for free because I didn't have any money. Right. Then I went to the parole board, where because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, and with that, they denied me parole. Along with them citing nature of the crime. Despite telling me in their decision that I had a good disciplinary record, that I had an excellent educational record as well. But so that's the legal history aspect. We'll get to the exoneration in a minute. But to take a half step back to your question. Mm-hmm. How I survived, basically, right? So belief in God was one thing. The second thing was I thought I was just doing a year or two to the next legal proceeding, which I was sure I was going to win because I was innocent and I still believed in the court system. I used to go to a law library and learn the law because I didn't trust the lawyers to defend me anymore without any kind of supervision. So I learned the law, and that gave me a little bit of comfort and sense of empowerment. I used to collect articles on other people who were exonerated, and I used that as a motivation. There was another prisoner there, Frank Sterling, who was also wrongfully imprisoned, and we kept each other going for 13 and a half years. So we met once every 6 months once every 6 weeks. And, half the conversation would be about continuing morale-wise, and the other half we would think about like what's the next move to make. Ultimately, Frank was exonerated a couple of years after me through DNA. There was an elaborate delusion that I engaged in pertaining to sports. I used to pretend that when I would play basketball or ping pong or chess, that I was a professional player, and so were the other people. But it wasn't really like kids pretending, on a playground someplace. This was more a survival mechanism. I needed to leave the prison for a couple hours. I developed different routines. So I would listen to sports talk radio, but it wasn't listening to sports talk radio. It was a lifeline to the outside. I would collect pictures of nature scenes, and there was a section in the cell where you were allowed to tape the pictures up, and I would look at those and kind of travel there mentally. When they gave us televisions in the cells, when they allowed us to purchase televisions in the cell, I mean, rephrase. For the most part, it stayed off because I was doing legal work, writing letters and reading nonfiction books. But when I would have it on, I would watch certain weekly shows and I would pretend like if I'm visiting with friends when I would see the same show. So all of those things in total, allowed me to keep going. And then a pen pal showed up in the nick of time. I had placed the ad in a newspaper in the Sacramento Bee, actually. And somebody replied that I didn't know from a hole in the wall he was a crime victim, but he, believed in my innocence because of my ad. I referenced that I was innocent and that the DNA didn't match me. And so we corresponded for what turned out to be my last year of wrongful imprisonment. And like I was openly asking him in the letters, look, should I quit? Should I give up? Just end this. I'm never going to get out of here. Maybe I should just go ahead and commit suicide and just be done with this. I'm doing a life sentence anyway. I'm never going to admit I'm guilty. They're never going to parole me until I do. So what's the point of everything? And so really, it was all of those things that allowed me to keep going and to survive. But even so, even with all of that, it was still like barely.
Do you have a cellmate while you were in prison, or did you have your own cell? What was the whole structure like?
So half the time I didn't have a cellmate, and the other half the time I did. New York State started doing double bunking in 1995, and so from that point, from 1995 to 2006, half the time I had a cellmate, and the other half the time I did not. Thankfully, all the people that I was put in the double bunk cell with were all like, level-headed, reasonable people, rather than other nightmare scenarios, many of which I saw and heard about.
Yeah. That's what I was worried about. Just getting that wrong kind of cellmate that would just make your life even more of a hell than it was. Like
I was fortunate in that regard.
Yeah. Getting like a little bit of levity from the gods there.
Yes.
Wow. So you're petitioning, you're doing all this. What was it like when it finally happened, when they finally allowed the rerun of the DNA? What was that whole situation like? Tell us about how that happened.
So I got one of the letters that I wrote set in motion a chain of events by which I wound up with the Innocence Project agreeing to represent me.
The Innocence Project. Now, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, they're a nonprofit organization in Manhattan, New York, that works to free wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country in those cases where DNA evidence can demonstrate innocence.
Nice.
So that was the first factor. Second thing was the district attorney, Janine Pirro, who became the DA before my first appeal was decided, but kept the ball rolling against me, including blocking several attempts at the DNA testing and getting me thrown out of court on the timeliness that we talked about. She left office. Zester allowed me to have the testing that Pirro would not. And the third thing is when we took the DNA evidence and put it in the DNA database, we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank because he, committed an unrelated crime after committing the crime in my case, which resulted in his DNA being put into the data bank. So September 22nd, 2006, my conviction was overturned after 16 years in prison, and I was released. And I reported back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges against me were dismissed on actual innocence grounds.
Wow. And the unrelated case, was that the one that happened after your conviction, or was that before?
Yes. No, that's the one that happened after.
Oh,
so
wow.
had the police not did what they did, had the medical examiner not did what they did, had the prosecutor not did what he did, had the judge not did what he did, then the second victim, Patricia Morrison, she would not have been killed. She would still be living.
Oh man. So you're out now. And what was it like being out there? Like you're breathing free air, you're out, all of the charges and everything have been dropped, but at the same time, there's that still public perception that kind of hangs over everything. What was that like, kind of getting back into the world and trying to basically like reintegrate yourself back into everything?
It was very difficult reintegrating back into society. Once the actual perpetrator was arrested and convicted, which was, a little bit later on, and then ultimately a report came out which broke down like everything that happened in my case, that culminated into my wrongful conviction and ultimate imprisonment for 16 years. So once all of that happened, it was pretty much clear to everybody that I was innocent. So there really, except in certain small pockets, there wasn't much doubt about my innocence. But the issue came in the following ways. So there was a social stigma. So you were in prison for 16 years wrongfully, yes, but you were there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? I was released with nothing. New York State does have compensation law that you can seek compensation, but you have to file a lawsuit. That's a process. It ultimately took me 5 years before I was compensated. So my point is that there was nothing to help me get from point A to point B. So I was never able to obtain gainful employment. I was making money doing speaking engagements, but that's not a consistent form of income. I caught on as a weekly columnist, but they only wanted one article a week. So, I didn't have very much money, and I lacked stability of housing. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from the homeless shelter.
Wow.
It felt like I was in a parallel universe because technology was much different. So cell phones, GPS, internet that hadn't been created yet, when I was last free. Culture was different, and neighborhoods looked different. So cumulatively, it felt like I was in a parallel universe, one that I didn't belong in. It was very lonely. Psychological after effects. So it's typical when people have been wrongfully imprisoned that they have after effects. So post-traumatic stress syndrome, panic attacks, anxiety, fear on seeing law enforcement, a feeling of processing things at a slower speed, feeling of having been frozen in time. So I was released when I was 32. Right. But I felt like I was 17 because that was how old I was when I was last free.
Yeah.
So all of those things were factors. So it was extremely difficult. At the same time, though, while experiencing all that difficulty, I did kind of sort of have a lightning bolt moment, which was that when I was released, I spoke at a press conference, and I gave like an off the cuff and unanticipated 2.5 hour of everything I could always wanted to say, but could never get anyone to hear. And I realized then that I could be an advocate without necessarily being an attorney. And so I did a lot of advocacy work while experiencing all of that adversity that I mentioned to you. So I was speaking, I was writing articles, I was treating privacy for awareness. So I kept doing media interviews. I was regularly meeting with elected officials. I did get the scholarship from Mercy College to get the bachelor's degree. And when I lost a temporary housing and was on the verge of entering a homeless shelter, they allowed me to live on campus. So that's how I avoided that. And, I was rather foolishly thinking at that point that, I was too old to go to school, but I really didn't. Well, I was just kind of floundering around. I didn't know what to do. And so they came along with their scholarship offer, and I was able to not just graduate, but I was able to springboard from that and also get a master's degree from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, with my thesis written on wrongful conviction causes and reform.
Wow, that's fantastic. So just real quick, just kind of going back a little bit, you were arrested at 16, convicted at 17. That's around the time when everyone really kind of has a sense of what they want to do with their lives, like once they go into college and after college and everything. What were your initial thoughts? What were you planning on being when you grew up, when all this was happening?
I wanted to really. Absolutely. I wanted to be an attorney, but it was not to do criminal justice work or anything to do with wrongful conviction. I just wanted to be an attorney because, I met my mother's personal injury attorney a couple of times. He was well dressed, had the suit, the Tachi case, and he appeared to be well respected. He appeared to be making, good money. And I wanted to do that based on that.
Okay. So law was at some point going to be a part of your life. It just obviously happened in a much different way than you would have expected, than anyone would have expected.
Correct.
So you have this opportunity. You're able to, get things going with your bachelor's. You go forward with your master's, which is fabulous. And is that where you realize, like, hey, I have a path here?
Yes, it is, but just a little bit past that point. So at that point, I was compensated and I started the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, as we talked about at the beginning. And at some point, I felt like it wasn't enough for me to be in the front row of the courtroom when somebody was, it was an effort at freeing someone who's wrongfully imprisoned. I wanted to be able to sit at the defense table. I wanted to be able to represent some of the clients. I wanted to be able to make some of the arguments. And so I decided to go into law school. To take a half step back myself, the second point that I thought about being a lawyer beyond my teenage years, the other point, I remember I was in Sing Sing correctional facility in maybe like 2 or 3. That was about 2 or 3 years before I was released. I remember just sitting there, like sitting down in my cell and holding on to the damn cell bars and just kind of wistfully thinking, man, if I ever manage to get out of here, okay, I'm going to become a lawyer and I'm going to free other people in this position, But then I thought but then I tempered my own daydream. Well, good luck with that. Okay. You're in here doing a life sentence. Your appeals are over and, no one's answering your letters. You'll never get the opportunity. So fast forwarding back to it not being enough to simply be in the front row of the courtroom, I decided to make a foray into law school. And this was actually my first attempt. So when I graduated with the bachelor's, I tried to get into law school, but my LSAT, my law school entrance exam test score was not high enough. And so 11 schools declined to let me go. And so as a consolation, 6 months after that, I decided to get the master's degree. And, then our work took place in the foundation that we've talked about. And I decided to take a second stab at it. I had just finished doing a presentation in front of judges. Actually, they wanted me to come and talk about some wrongful conviction topics, and I was chit-chatting in a hallway with the judge, and she said to me, why don't you go to law school? Why don't you just go and get the piece of paper, get the credential? I mean, this topic better than some lawyers, even better than some judges. Otherwise, why would we have you here to present? And so that kind of ended the debate in my mind whether I wanted to again make it an attempt to go to law school. It was 3 long, hard years that I knew it would be, most of which would pertain to studying legal topics that had nothing to do with wrongful conviction or criminal law. But that ended the debate in my mind, and I decided to go. And ultimately, I did graduate law school, and I've become an attorney.
Wow. So you go through that whole process. You become an attorney now, but tell us a little bit about the first overturning that you were able to accomplish with the foundation.
Yeah, so that was the William Lopez case, and funny you should mention that because a little bit earlier this morning, Facebook gives you memories like this day in history, however many years ago from your own timeline. And there was actually a picture of me and our client and my friend, William Lopez. A picture showed up, and, that was Bill and I had went to the Innocence Network conference. And that's a get together of a who's who in the field, everyone doing this policy work and freeing people, along with a ton of exonerees also. So Bill came with me to this. It's an annual gathering. So going back to his case, though, so Bill had a pre-existing legal team that had been with him for 9 years, but the foundation joined the effort. We were with him for his last year, and it was kind of like a building was built, but it was missing a section. So we helped find some additional evidence that proved to be pivotal. So Bill, we took his case, it kind of leapt off the pages because the original description was 2 dark-skinned Panamanians, 6'1", 6'2", and Bill was a 5'7", light-skinned Puerto Rican. The weight estimation was people that were 100 pounds heavier than he was. It started out as a 2-witness case, but one of the witnesses could not identify him in court. The second witness had been up for 24 hours, had done 12 vials of drugs.
Wow.
And she claimed to be testifying because it was the right thing to do, although she was released from jail miraculously 1 day after he was found guilty. And then his lawyers had talked him out of calling his alibi witnesses to testify in the courtroom. So his case leapt off the pages. Ultimately, he was exonerated. He was released after 23 and a half years.
Whoa.
But
23 and a half years?
Yes. 23 and a half years. Yes. Yeah. But I mean, basically his whole adult life was stolen from him, because not just the length of time, but just what happened afterwards, which was that, he only lived a year and a half after being released.
Oh no. Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. And I was even all set to ask, like, what did William do after he was released? Was he able to, at least, like, with that limited amount of time left, was he able to do something similar to what you've done? Just kind of commit yourself to making sure
he
no one else goes through that again?
Yeah, he was. He was. Whenever I would call him up, he would answer the phone, and we went on a ton of interviews together, not just in New York, but in other states. Mm-hmm. And when we would have different fundraising events, he would show up. When we would go to Albany, New York State's capital, and meet with elected officials, and he would come with us, and we would reference his case as a concrete example of why we needed wrongful conviction prevention measures to be enacted into law. So yeah, he did spend quite a bit of time with me, doing advocacy work, and we really became friends. So we did different things together. I mean, we went to some amusement parks, and we went to some restaurants. And look, Bill got so comfortable with each other. Sometimes he would show up at my door unannounced, and I'd open up the door, and he'd be there, and he'd come in, and he'd have his hand behind him, and he was trailing a piece of luggage that had like wheels on it. And
man!
Oh, Bill, you got your luggage? What's going on? I'm staying over the weekend. All right, Bill. Well, you know where your bedroom is. So.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So we went to we posted pictures, and I remember there was a time we went to Playland, which is in Rye, New York, and they had so they had like a cutout where you could stick your face in and everything there, and he sticks his face in, and we took a picture, and he posted it. His first experience doing that. So we did do some fun things, and I try to take heart in the fact that, look, he died a free man. Mm-hmm. He died recognized as an innocent man. Yeah. And I like to believe that year and a half that he did have of freedom, could be counted within the top 4 to 5 years of his life. Mm-hmm. So I think I try to take some heart in that, rather than him just dying in prison, as so many people do, with their innocence never known by the world.
Have you done any sort of exoneration for people posthumously?
No, we have not done any exoneration works for anybody posthumously. Everyone that we've gotten out is alive. And, the unfortunate reality is that, at least at this point in time, in terms of our budget, I mean, it would take an awful lot for us to do something posthumously when there's so many people waiting that are still alive. I mean, that's just an unfortunate practicality of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. With you said that you've been able to overturn 10 convictions, correct?
Well, we've been able to free 10 people. So let's get into the weeds a little bit of that. Yeah. So three of those were exonerations. Mm-hmm. Another case was our client. So our client had did 16 and a half years. The conviction was overturned based mm-hmm. on legally insufficient evidence. He was released. Right. The United States Supreme Court reinstated his conviction 4 months later. So really? He had to go back to prison, where he stayed for another 5 years while the fight continued. And eventually, in a 5-way collaboration, which the foundation was part of, new evidence was uncovered showing that the only witness against him actually had been an alternative suspect, and that had not been discovered. The motive witness had a familial relationship with the lead detective's mother that had never been disclosed. Oh. And then there were several hundred pages of documents that were supposed to have been turned over, but were not. So all of that formed the basis of why he was given a post-conviction hearing for his innocence claim and the, claim that evidence had been withheld. And so a couple of days before the hearing, the Attorney General's office, told them, look, you can fight this out. Maybe you'll win. Maybe you won't. We're certainly going to appeal. If we lose, we've already won before. On all those appeals before you got out, we got it over. You got your conviction reinstated after it was reversed, and we've been winning ever since. Yeah. So, why don't you think about this? This is a life without parole sentence that you're doing. You can fight it out. Maybe you win, maybe you don't. Or if you want, instead, you can go home tomorrow if you take this deal. Just take this no low contender plea. It says that, you're telling the court you're innocent, but you don't want to fight anymore, and you'll be released immediately on parole, but you're going to continue to have a conviction. And, we told him, don't do it. Everyone else in the other 4 entities in the collaboration told him to do it. And he decided to do it. He wanted to spend a little bit of time with his mother, who, wound up, passing away within a year of him actually doing, regaining his freedom by taking the deal. So that was the 4th person. Then the other 6 people were via parole. So normally when somebody goes to the parole board, if they maintain their innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, they're almost always denied parole, which results in an extension of an already unjust prison stay. We saw that happened in my story. So policy-wise, if any of our clients come up for parole prior to us exonerating them, then we try to get them released on parole so that they can wait while efforts continue, but they can wait while being in the street rather than behind the wall.
Yeah.
So despite that general dynamic of innocence maintaining equals denial of parole, we've been able in 6 instances to help free people through parole. So that's those are the other 6. So that's the weeds of the 10 people that we've been able to free.
Gotcha. And I can't help but wonder, and I doubt, that they would have had the decency to do this, but did anyone that was involved in your conviction ever approach you after the fact and apologize?
No, nobody ever did. I did get a symbolic apology from the prosecutor and the judge, but that was not the judge or the prosecutor that was originally involved in my case. They were just the counterparts to that, later on. Nobody ever apologized to me, except the actual perpetrator. But his apology was kind of tempered significantly because he mixed in his apology with a lie. He claimed that had he known I was doing time for his crime, that he would have spoken up and said something. But he lived in Peekskill. That was a small city, as you know, 25,000 people. Everybody was talking about the case and my case. And, in fact, I've met people afterwards since I've been home that knew him prior to his being arrested. And they they confirmed that they had conversations with him about the case. I mean, he didn't admit guilt to them, but he talked to them about the case. The point being, he knew that somebody was doing time for his crime. So that apology really didn't mean very much in light of that lie.
Yeah, it seemed like with that kind of a town, you have to go out of your way to avoid hearing something like that. As soon as someone talks about it, you just got to slam your hands over your ears and just walk away from everything.
Right.
So, that's wow. That's amazing. What you're doing, this whole mission is just absolutely stellar, and I hope that it continues on as best it could. I hope that all of my listeners here have really been able to take in this incredible story. And I really hope that all of you go ahead and support the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. It really is doing some wonderful work, and it really is hopefully inspiring other people to step up and really contribute the way that you do. And so this is definitely an out of the ordinary Excelsior journey. But at the same time, you are on this incredible journey that I really hope that a lot of other people emulate.
Yeah, I appreciate the words, and I agree with you. And I really would like people to emulate that. I wish that there were, more people that would get involved. Maybe they hear this and then they do something similar. Other people exonerated, or whenever you were, or even just genericizing a little bit more, expanding out a little bit. I mean, whatever difficult situation that somebody went through in the course of their life. I mean, once you overcome that, once you come out the other side, get involved as an advocate, reaching back to help other similarly situated people, whether that's, women that have been involved in, abusive relationships, or God forbid have been sex trafficked, or, people who've, escaped oppressive regimes. I mean, there's no limit to the application. That same paradigm that I do can be applied to other situations. And I got to tell you that it's very meaningful doing this work. It's healing, it's cathartic. It makes a difference. I think that other people will find it that way as well. And look, just living a purpose-driven life, a selfless life, trying to be, leave the world better, be pleasing to God, all those things together,
Absolutely. Make the world better. That's what this is all about. That's what this show has been all about. So this really does, absolutely, without question, qualifies as a true Excelsior journey to continue to better yourself, to better your community, to better your people, and to better the world as a whole, like what you're doing right now. And I hope that all of you are paying attention. There is hope in all of this. And I hope that all of you have grasped onto that as well and continue to support people like Jeffrey who are doing this great work. So for Jeffrey Deskovic, this is George Sirois saying to all of you, ever upward, and I will see you next week. Today's show is brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. If you've never been an Audible customer and want to see what they offer, just go to www.audibletrial.com/Excelsior Journeys and browse the unmatched selection of audio programs. Download a title for free and start listening. It's that easy. Why Audible? Audible content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more from the leading audiobook publishers, broadcasters, and entertainers. And with this free 30-day trial, you'll have your pick of it all. You can hear books of all genres narrated by Jim Dale, Stephen Fry, Will Patton, Alex Hyde White, Jeff Brick, Neil Shaw, William Demerit, and even a few by me, George Sirois. So go to www.audibletrial.com/Excelsior Journeys and start your own 30-day journey with Audible today.